I'm Caitlin E, and welcome back to the Lit Review. Today, I'm going to be doing something I don't do very frequently on this channel, and that's a straight book review. So if you watched my January Litland video, you know that I need to do a book review as part of my community troll bridge prompt, the monthly troll, as we lovingly call it. And so that is what I'm here to complete for you today. But I also kind of want to take a beat and highlight a book that I don't see that many people talking about, but I would really like for them to, because I've been enjoying the heck out of it. I didn't read a ton in January, but one of the books I did read was a chunkster, and that is book 2 in the Viking Omegaverse series, Taming the Wolves by Lix Robinson. I read this on Kindle Unlimited and decided to buy the paperback because I am genuinely obsessed with this series. I also purchased book 1, which is Stolen by the Wolves, which you can see me kind of talk about a little bit in my best of the year, because I read this in December of last year and it completely took me by surprise. So today I'm going to be talking to you about both of these books, why I think you should play catch up on the series, and pay attention to Lix Robinson as a writer. So let me start by saying that, I am aware of what I am doing to you all by recommending you read these books. Lix Robinson is pretty candid about the fact that this is intended to be a 6-book series. Only 3 of the 6 books are currently out, though she does seem to be going at a pretty fair clip of publishing. So I have reasonable confidence that within the next couple of years, we will get the full series out and about through Kindle Unlimited. The 3rd book recently just came into paperback. There are also 2 novellas associated with the series. So if you wanted to do kind of like a taste test on your feels for Lix Robinson as a writer, that might be a way to go. They are tangentially related to the overall world of the Viking Omegaverse, but are not necessarily going to impact your experience of the series overall. But let me tell you a little bit how I found out about Stolen by the Wolves by Lix Robinson. So I'm a Storygraph Premium member. It is something that I do pay for with my own money. I've really found that Storygraph Premium for me has been worth the premium commitment, though I do think you can still get a lot out of Storygraph as a platform for free. One of the things that they recently have started rolling out is recommendations. Now, Goodreads as a competing platform does also do recommendations, but I think Storygraph, and specifically Storygraph Premium, does a better job of culling through what you have read, what tropes you seem to like, what length of books you seem to like, and really cultivating a set of recommendations for you across a bunch of categories. Now, why I picked up Stolen by Wolves is because it was actually featured across many different types of recommendations within the recommendation platform on Storygraph when I tried it in early December. The cover really grabbed me. You know here on the Lit Review that I am a simp for a good cover, and I just thought this was such a gorgeous illustrated cover that is doing something a little different than a lot of illustrated covers on the market right now, and that is what grabbed my eye initially. So also, the covers that I'm about to show you, they're illustrated by Lix Robinson as well, which is even more impressive to me because this is just really cool and really stunning. Then, of course, the idea that it's a Omegaverse romance absolutely grabbed me. It does have content warnings. There are more detailed content warnings, but before we get much further, I will read some of these out to you. There's graphic depictions of violence like Friends. Bloody, gory violence, battles. She's gonna say sexual situations. We'll talk about what that means in a bit. There's also strong language. She self-identifies this in her opening page as a slow burn, why choose? I'm going to try to overly enunciate because I know it sounds like I'm saying wide shoes sometimes when I say that. And it's a series that as it progresses, the main romance is going to involve more than just one love interest, though I will say in book 1, it's mostly these 2 here. And I will tell you more about them and their character names in a hot second. Also, she has more detailed content warnings as well. There is, very bluntly, I'm going to say, there is SA or sexual assault in this book, not by the hero, but by the principal antagonist. Maybe a deal breaker for some of you, so I want to be as blunt about that as I can, and so does Lix Robinson in her content warnings. There is also self-flagellation, so self-harm is another way to put it. There's religious trauma and human sacrifice in here, so it's got some heavy-duty content warnings that I want to be really blunt about before I get going and try to sell you on this book. Whew. Okay, taking a breath. why I think you should give this one a shot. It's really compellingly written, for starters. It's set in 1870. I would say this is like historical fantasy, but the fantasy elements are pretty light. It's a light fantasy in the grand scheme of things. The elements that speak to fantasy are kind of like the idea of gods and goddesses that may or may not be walking among folks. Also, like the way in which the Omegaverse starts to become more clear does kind of, it's not like a full shifter situation. Teeth elongate, you know, so like that's the kind of level of Omegaverse that we're dealing with. And if you've never heard the phrase Omegaverse before, it is a series of kinks where there are like more dominant or more physically intimidating like alphas, who in this case are Viking warriors. And then there are Omegas, who are frequently women, but not exclusively women, just like men are not exclusively alphas. They're horny on main, friends. Like they are, you know, they feel the sexual feelings extra hard, especially during moon cycles in this particular version of the Omegaverse. So there is like things like breeding kink involved because there's like biological imperatives going on. But the setting of this makes it like really unique and interesting. Our heroine Tamsin is a princess of this land called, I think, Strathclyde. Boop, here's the map. So we're kind of here. The United Kingdom circa 1870 essentially, but like some clear liberties have been taken because of the setting and the fantasy scape. So Tamsin is a princess who's been engaged to a prince of Dalriata as a kind of like good faith gesture against the Vikings. She is what's known as a daughter of Clota. Basically a daughter of Clota. Clota is one of the goddesses in this story, and that's essentially how they define Omegas. Like they don't necessarily use the terminology of alpha and omega very much throughout the book. So she is seen by her own people as having these like uncontrollable urges. They both privilege and prize these women, but also try to teach them like self-control. And that's where the religious trauma comes in. So like she is taught to basically like harm herself to like keep down her monthly sexual urges when the moon is full. That is important because the Vikings have very different myths and legends about who these women are and their role in society. Viking men, particularly alpha Viking men, were basically convinced these women didn't exist and that they were myths. They have been kind of hidden away in Strathclyde and are very, very rare. The first fella you're going to meet here is Thrain. He's a scarred Viking hero. They infiltrate Strathclyde with the help of basically the dude Tamsin's engaged to, because they have decided that they are going to take down Strathclyde from the inside. So if you like complicated politics, friends, this is where it's at. Like the intricacy of the world building is so there. The political scheming is there. The sexual tension is really, really strong. So I would say book one is much more about like the setup, getting you invested in the world building, getting you invested in the personal stakes of both Thrain and Tamsin. There's a lot of this book that is like plot. It is much more plot than anything else. When we talk about sexual content in book one in particular, there is sensuality. There is sexy times. I would say I would still give this a 3 chili pepper on my personal scale, but it is also like super gory and violent, and there's torture, and it's a dark historical fantasy romance. But it got better from there. I have no idea if I'm even selling this to you well. I'm just obsessed with it and I want to talk to you about it. I'm gonna talk very vaguely about book 2 in an attempt to not do spoilers. Everything I've just said, I think, has like some potential light spoilery moments to it, but is really just about getting you invested and getting you onboarded into what this little universe is all about. Bigger, much bigger. This is Taming the Wolves. So again, you have this gorgeous cover that Lix illustrates. So this is, again, still Thrain and Tamsin, and she, again, is identifying this as a slow burn over the course of like the 6 books. I would say it's slow in the sense of like it takes her a while to get all of the guys on board. For a while she is really like laser focused on just Thrain, but in book 2 you do start to see the building potential of the other folks who will become her partners across the course of the story. I think you definitely get hints of it in book 1, but by book 2, she's starting to consider it and is starting to feel really uncomfy, but also very stoked about the potential of more than just one partner. But it is a slow build. The majority of the sexual content that you will see in here, though, is primarily Tamsin and Thrain. So I imagine, because book 3 has one of the other characters on the cover, I imagine book 3 is when we will start to get into that relationship, but that's pure speculation on my part since I haven't read it yet. The two other love interests that you will meet in book 1 and get more of a sense of in book 2 are brothers. It is Ivar and Olaf, and they are like the princes of the Viking King, and Thrain is kind of their adopted brother. They are collectively referred to in book 1 and book 2 and throughout the series as the Wolves of Dublin because they have successfully invaded and claimed Dublin. I will also say that while it's not mentioned in the content warnings, it is implied in book 1 and 2 to some degree that the Vikings are like involved in a slave trade. So I consider that also a content warning, though neither book really deals very heavily with that. That's just like an existence part of the culture that I hope will be addressed at some point. But in book 2, you're picking up right where you left off. The story really does flow very cleanly from book 1 to book 2, and I anticipate that being true throughout the rest of the series. But you do start to see more of the bond between Tamsin and Thrain. You get to see her start to consider Ivar and Olaf, and them consider her as well. There is a lot more heat, a lot more sensuality in this book, so I would personally update it to at least a 4 on the pepper scale, because we haven't actually gotten to like group scenes, which are very frequent in Why Choose books. I don't want to dive too deep on the plot here, except to say that I really enjoyed the character progression in book 2 from 1 to 2. This is also, both books are dual POV. In this case, you are primarily getting Thrain and Tamsin. You do, I think, maybe get like one chapter of Ivar somewhere between the two books, or like maybe half a chapter. I do think Tamsin and Thrain have really distinct voices and perspectives, and it's interesting to see the other through their eyes because of their cultural clash. I do think one of the things that makes this such a dynamic series to read, and why I would encourage you to pick it up, is Lix Robinson is a really good fantasy writer. She just also happens to be really good at writing smut. The world building and the setting in these two books is really, really lovely. It's, if you are a romantasy person who wants even more heat and spice, or if you like Omegaverses or Why Choose romances, I think this is something we've all been sleeping on. Like, this is so good. I also think if you are a romance reader who has been really drawn in by the work of somebody like Sierra Simone, whose primary theme that Sierra Simone really gets into is like recovery from religious trauma, even though there are very justifiable trigger warnings for these books, and Tamsin specifically, her recovery and experience of religious trauma, because you do see it on the page in book 1 pretty aggressively. I think if you are into Sierra Simone and the way she handles religious trauma, you are very likely going to enjoy Lix Robinson and Tamsin's processing of religious trauma, because she has been told her whole life that her lust and her like monthly heat is not only wrong, but like harmful to other people. And she has been instructed that the only way to contain herself and to contain the power of her body is through self-harm. So you see her take those actions in book 1, which is honestly really gruesome and part of why it has the trigger warnings that it does. And then in book 2, you see her slow journey to recovery more clearly, where she starts to question some of the things that she's grown up with. She starts to like understand more of the way that the Viking culture has seen her like physical abilities or gifts, and how other cultures throughout the islands also see her like sexuality, which starts to make her question a lot of things. And so I think it's a complicated emotional journey that Lix Robinson pulls off for both Thrain and Tamsin. Thrain is going through his own thing where I don't want to spoil it, but he has some physical limitations in book 2 that he is trying to figure out how to deal with, which is a really like interesting thing to be in his head while he's going through it. You also still get to see him be like very powerful and protective of Tamsin, and the way he sees her, and the way he's like baffled by the way that she grew up, and also in his own way is deeply questioning whether or not he and his family are right to be invading her homeland. So there are like some really interesting power dynamics in this novel, because he feels really guilty about falling for her and calling it love when he is like the soon-to-be invading force of her homeland. And he articulates these power dynamics, and they negotiate that together in a way that I found really interesting. While I have no idea what book 3 is going to hold, except this is Ivar. Like, I'm hoping that means we get some more Ivar content. We get a little bit of Ivar in here, and Tamsin and he are kind of like starting to figure it out. And I'm really into it. Like, I think Ivar might secretly be my fave, but we'll see. But I'm really looking forward to it. I will link below Lix Robinson's Instagram, because that's where I'm getting a lot of my updates, because I recently started following her after falling in love with this series. If you like Why Choose, if you like Omegaverse, or if you just like really spicy fantasy or romantasy, I think you should pick it up. This is available through Kindle Unlimited if you are a subscriber to that service. You can also buy the paperbacks through Amazon. Currently, that is the only place to buy the paperbacks. And the third book recently came out in paperback, so I will likely be trialing it first on Kindle Unlimited to make sure that it's something I want to keep. And then we'll add to cart probably immediately. I love these books so much. If anything that I have said today resonates or makes you kind of curious, I hope you give this book a shot. I know that was a very rambly, detailed review, so thank you for listening to me. Let me know down in the comments below whether or not you think you would check out this book, or if you have any other like recommendations for me based on the way I gush about this book series. And let me know if this style of review was helpful for you and if you'd like to see me do it with other books. As always, thank you for spending time with me. I hope you have the best reading day or night, depending on when you see this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
Hold on, girl, now wait just a minute. I've got something to say, you should hear it. Oh, I'm happy to make time.